So here we are, sharing secrets of the soil with me, your host, Regen Ray. G'day soil lovers, Regen Ray here. Welcome to another edition of the Secrets of the Soil. I'm pretty excited because we're about to get our hands dirty and dig deep with Nick joining us all the way from Germany. Hello, Nick. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited to start talking about all things soil and permaculture. Share with our soil lovers a little bit about who you are and how you got your hands dirty in the dirt.
I'm Nick, as you just said, from Hamburg, Germany, and I spent pretty much all my youth out on the fields, just exploring nature, always being outside. So I got into that quite early. And then, I've always had the strive to do something that matters in some respect. And I think just around the time of finishing high school, I realized that there's a lot of things not quite as they should be, especially when we're looking at the environment and climate and these things. So I got more into it, and I always thought like doing things alone is okay, but if you really want to have an impact, you need more people, you need to get together. And also at that time, I realized how many super powerful corporations there are and what they're doing. So I thought, hey, it kind of makes sense to have something that they have, but with a goal that is a positive one and not just a goal of just, contributing to problems. And so I went to university. I studied business. I realized at that point that getting into big organizations to change things takes a lot of time and is really difficult. But when you just start a new organization, you can just start it from the ground up as a positive entity. So I studied entrepreneurship and innovation for my master's. And while I was sitting on the toilet at a friend's place, I saw a book called Permaculture by Sepp Holzer. So he's this really famous Austrian permaculturalist. Not sure if he's also that famous in Australia. But I looked into it and I was like, hey, this is fantastic. There are so many solutions in here. This whole permaculture thing makes so much sense. Like, why isn't everyone doing that? And so after university, I could have gone into any kind of job or started something in the corporate startup world, but I thought, hey, I need to get my hands dirty. I need to learn. So I moved to Tenerife on the Canary Islands. Mostly my initial thought of going there was, hey, it's warm. I just studied for a long time in Amsterdam where it's really cold and rainy. I want to have a good life and go surfing. But then I thought like, hey, I'm here. It's so dry. This whole permaculture thing makes so much sense here. I need to learn. I need to get my hands dirty. So I worked on different farms there. Got really into it. Basically, my whole life then evolved around permaculture. So I read all the books I could, watched all the videos, just went into everything permaculture, and then got practical experience on the farm. And because we had a lot of volunteers that I was managing at some point, and they wanted to learn, so I got into this part. And so I started giving workshops. I started planting a lot of, got into food forest and went to another farm where there was a lot of space to plant stuff. So I got into that, got into agroforestry, gave more workshops. And that's kind of how the journey started. From there, continued, but we can talk about that a bit later.
Awesome. It sounds fantastic. And it's all topics that I've been digging deep into. And I love the fact that there's also the overlap of that business and entrepreneur side of things as well, because I always see a lot of overlaps with the way that people are running businesses, and even your view of working with others can be quite difficult and trying to create change. So you just build it from the ground up. And I think, sometimes that's a really good kind of mindset to sit in and so forth. And awesome, you can actually remember the time that you saw a book that changed, a bit of a pivot in your life. And it's normally those times where we slow down and do nothing and relaxing and having me time where these downloads of magic moments can happen. So that's an awesome pivot point in your life. So I know with permaculture, it's one of those big kind of topics. And, I think sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. There's different zones and different techniques, but what are some of the things that you recommend people do to get started if they're sitting there curious and they're going, well, I want to explore this permaculture stuff? What's a quick win or something simple that people can do?
I think if people don't have a clue yet, they just heard the word, they should look into what's their favorite type of learning. So if they're into reading, there are a lot of great books. I think one of the really good starting book is Gaia's Garden. which is a really nice, it makes it really visual to see what permaculture is into. If you're more into videos, there's so much great stuff out there. I think especially YouTube-wise, Jeff Lawton is doing a fantastic job at really putting out a lot of content. There's also a lot of podcasts that you can listen to. So it depends. Like, figure out how do you like to learn, and then what I would really recommend is start really small and slow. So that's also one of the principles. But it really makes sense, like once you get into the principle, it's like, okay, start with the way you think about things. Start with, okay, how do you look at problems? How do you look at situations that are happening? Do you have, even a tiny balcony or a windowsill? And there you can start and be like, okay, I'll figure it out. I'll get into it. Actually looking at soil in a different way. So there's many different pathways, but I would recommend get into it a little bit. And then there's so many fantastic courses out there. There's a lot of workshops. But I don't think there is like a one size fits all solution. So I would be really mindful of what works for you as a person, and then dig deeper. And then once you're in that rabbit hole, it's a gigantic one, and you'll probably never come out of it again.
Woohoo, that's the goal. I love those rabbit holes where you're just so in there and it's like, I don't want to go back out into the other world. During COVID, admittedly, I went internal and I invested a little bit in self-help and doing the Milkwood permaculture course here ran out of Tasmania in Victoria, their Australian mob, working with David Holgram. It was a really good way of like starting the principles. It was a little bit more about permaculture living, because I'm one of those people, as you mentioned, having a balcony. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, there's no point me doing the permaculture design course or getting accredited in that area and getting all the nitty gritty because I don't have any land. And I think that really got broken down when I started realizing doing the permaculture living course, that it is really about mindset and the way that you see the world. And I made a YouTube video about all the permaculture stuff I'm doing here in my apartment: balconying, kombucha, fermenting, collecting weeds, and just creating curiosity of learning what's in our own actual backyard, acknowledging the land, the previous owners. And yeah, I just think it's really interesting that it is more of a mindset, and you can start even if you don't have access to land. And that was a big aha moment. And I'm someone who's been in this space for a while, and I still kind of pigeonholed permaculture as like needing land and having to do designs and zones and all this complicated stuff.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, that's also when I'm teaching it in workshops, I don't focus so much on just having the land part and doing all. It's all mindset change. It's how you approach things. So what I really love is one of my favorite principles, the whole, what is called stacking functions there. So always think like when you're doing something, is it doing one thing or could it do more things? And that applies to business, that applies to living, that applies to just everything. When you're doing something and it only has one purpose, something is missing, like, can you do it in a way that it has a purpose for something later on, or can you add something on top? And also the like starting slow, getting feedback. These things make so much sense. Like sometimes we have a goal where we're like, hey, we need to do this now. So you put all your effort into it, you build something gigantic, be it construction wise or also in a business context. And then you realize after a while, hey, oh, this doesn't work. So in a business context, you put a lot of effort, you build a product, and then you realize no one wants this, which is a bit of an issue. But if you go slower, and then you test. And that's also what I like, where the intersection between permaculture and business is, with ideation, with design thinking. These are all concepts that are coming more from the business side of things and from the design side, but they almost identically represent principles of permaculture because it just makes sense. The things that work are quite universal. And so we need to prototype, we need to come up with new things. And then, you can, of course, also do that in the garden, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because as I've observed, and even myself, we tend to complicate things. We grab something that's so simple and we overcomplicate it. We want to have the 7-step formula that sits on top of the 12-day, boot camp and all this stuff. But, looking at permaculture and slowing down and even just how nature works, you do definitely get less, more out of less. You're doing less, getting more return, and stacking. I call it stacking enterprises, but very similar about that is like, how does one function have multiple purposes. And even like the waste of one thing can be the input to something else. And that circular economy where there is no waste and everything's really intentional and thought out. It's just really magical to hear some of these stories. I just want to shift gears a little bit and kind of go more into a little bit of like some aha moments. What are some of the facts and figures and fun facts, I guess, that really blew your mind when you started exploring this world of soil and permaculture that you can share with the soil lovers today?
If it's specific facts, I think it was a moment that was really incredible when I started reading Teaming with Microbes by Jeff Lowenfels, which is a book I would recommend to everyone, to any soil lover, anyone who has anything to do with soil. Read that book. Because before I knew like, yeah, well, in the soil, there's some earthworms and I don't know, they're probably doing good stuff. But then you realize like, whoa, there's this whole soil food web. And what really blew my mind is at that point, I already knew, okay, there are important microbes, important protozoa and other microbes in the ground. And I knew they were kind of important. But when I learned that this whole food web is regulated by the plants and their roots and their root exudates, that they need to feed this whole system, and that if there are no living roots, that system doesn't get fed, it disappears, and then the nutrients leave as well because they're in the bodies of these microorganisms. That was for me the biggest moment when I realized like, wow, like the plants are kind of farming these microbes to give them the nutrients they need and working in symbiosis with fungi. I think that was a really big moment. And then another that happened a bit earlier was about fungi. So I had heard quite a bit about fungi and roots trading and like kind of being connected and sharing nutrients. But when I learned that there's proper trade going on and that sometimes plant roots or fungi refuse, either if it's from the fungi side, they refuse sugars from the plant if it's not enough, or the plant refuses the nutrients from the fungi and doesn't give out sugars or other things when it's not enough in the trade, so that they're actually trading. They're saying like, hey, I'll give you this much of this resource if you give me that much. That completely blew my mind, that there's actual trade going on and proper like economics in the soil. I think those two moments were really incredible when I got into the whole soil thing. And then when it came to impact, I think when I looked at agriculture as a whole and the positive impact that agriculture can have on our climate, that was like, wow, okay, this is an absolute game changer. Because before, I was always about like tree planting and all that. And we usually hear this thing, okay, either we can use an area to grow food or we can use it to preserve nature, restore ecosystems. So it's always like, hey, both are important. And it's always like, oh no, but we need to cut down the rainforest here because we need food. Well, no, we can just set up regenerative systems and then actually grow food in healthy ecosystems and in forest ecosystems. And the more we get into regenerative agriculture, the more we can actually regenerate while growing food. So I really love this. Like, there's no or, it's and that's, those three things are probably the ones that stood out the most for me.
Wow. I can't agree with you more with the whole understanding the soil food web and knowing that there is so much life in our soil. And I shared this with you off camera or off recording, but I'll share it with all our soil lovers. Like a couple of months ago, we were umming and ahhing about who we wanted to serve every day. And that cliche question is, who's your avatar? Who are you waking up to serve and help every day? And we went, hang on a minute, soil is a living organism. Our avatar is soil. And that blew my mind because it is a living organism and it has so much life. And there is all these trades. I feel like Mother Nature has worked out how to do this trade better than some of the humans above the ground, you know, and it just happens so organically and naturally. And, you know, there is so much research coming out now that the trees in the forest are communicating to each other. And they've even got like mother-daughter type of relationship and protecting each other and working really, really together. And you look at that system and you think, wow. And then we run a tiller through through it and just rip it up like it doesn't matter, you know. And yeah, it really blew my mind around that. And the more I learn about the fungi, and there's a great documentary if anyone's curious about learning about fungi called Fantastic Fungi. It's the best $6 I spent on YouTube to rent it for a couple of days, and it blew my mind about what's happening. You know, even up until today, I'm still learning new things, and I'm addicted to learning this because the more I learn, the more inspired I am about creating change and impact. You mentioned the word regenerative, and I agree with you as well. Like, why can't we have both? Why can't we grow great food in a forest? And you mentioned syntropic farming and, you know, food forest, and there's this big trend now of like foodscaping instead of landscaping, and they make me super excited that people are starting to view things very differently. And I agree, why not have both rather than one or the other? Some of the systems need to change, like banking systems need to realize that cleared land isn't farmable land, you know, that agroforestry and trees and natural capital can actually play a big part in regenerating. But I'm curious to know, what does the word regenerative mean to you?
That is a very good question, because especially in the field of regenerative agriculture, the more we talk to people, the more we realize that it's really missing a clear definition. And for me, like, one of the most important things, and one of the things we should strive for, is building topsoil. If a system builds topsoil, so now this is focused on an agricultural context, maybe not in a business sense, but yeah, it needs to produce more than was needed to get it going. So that's the first thing. It's also kind of a definition of being sustainable, the original definition in permaculture. So a system that over its lifetime produces more energy than was needed to set it up is sustainable. And I think nowadays sustainable has kind of washed out as a term, because now we don't just need to sustain things. If we sustain the world how it is today, we still have a problem. It's already quite degraded. So that's why I'm thinking to be regenerative is quite important, that you put less in, but you get more out over time, and it improves over time. It gets more resilient, gets stronger. You get more nutrients, more life, more everything. That's kind of the very simple, broken down definition that I would use.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree with you that we in the industry are looking for a definition. And one of the reasons why I want to ask a lot of my guests this question is because I don't know if there is a universal agreement. And that's why I say, what does it mean to you? Because I really do believe that it is at the individual soul and heart level that regenerative can be a little bit different and unique, just like our fingerprint. And so I like the beauty in that, because we don't need to have a definition that's in the dictionary that, you know, everyone lives by. It can be something that is near and dear to us. And I love the way that you explain that, because like putting less in and getting more out, because nature can create a lot without us having to lift a finger. Yet farmers and businesses have always created their net worth by how long they're sitting on a tractor, or how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of inputs they're putting into a system. You know, there's a bit of an ego there. If you're not doing bigger numbers of inputs, then you're not having the yields. And we need to change that narrative, because who wouldn't want to sit under a tree and observe their landscape and yield profits from that? Especially, you know, when we start talking about profits per acre and different economies and nutrient dense food, you know, where's the value of nutrients gone? You know, we're producing carrots by the container load, but they've got no nutrients left in them, you know. So maybe sometimes it's about growing less carrots that are actually more wholesome and nourishing for the people eating it. Do you focus a lot around that nutrition side of things?
I would say it's kind of a co-benefit in a sense. So what we have now for the past almost 1.5 years, where I've been working on our startup that we call Climate Farmers. With that, we kind of went away a bit from this me doing permaculture stuff, because we realized there's a big issue that, especially in the permaculture regenerative scene, there's a lot of really negative talk towards farmers who are farming in a more conventional industrial way. And I believe that is a big problem, because we are all in this field of agriculture together and we need to advance it together. And if it's always like those weird permaculture hippies just saying that the conventional industrial people are just doing a horrible job and killing the soil, that's only going to lead to them being like, hey, no matter what these hippies say, I'm not going to do that because screw them. And I think that is a very, very big problem. And so with climate farmers, we thought like, hey, how can we bridge the gap? How can we use many of these great findings, these great things about soil health, about nutritious food, and how can we bridge the gap between that and more conventional industrial growing? And how can we get the best of both worlds? Because if we only sit in our tiny gardens with our herb spirals and hugel beds, that's also not going to change anything on a global scale. And so we need to combine these two systems. And now we are working with climate farmers. We're working a lot with farmers who call themselves 100% industrial conventional, but they say, hey, I want soil health. I want to grow nutritious food. And that's also where it now comes back in, because they also realized, okay, I can grow on hundreds of hectares. I can grow whatever stuff that's not really nutritionally dense. It kind of does the job just looking at weight, but it's not really good food. And I also might not want to eat it that much. So we see a lot of push from that side. They're saying, hey, if I feed my soil instead of my plants, so if I move from fertilizer that's just going straight to the roots and then being washed out when it rains, to actually using natural processes to bring nutrition, not only do I get much healthier plants, but the nutrition goes up tremendously. And it's so much better food. They can sell it for much more, so they can get much better profits. They can move away from this commodity market where prices are determined by a world market, and they can set their own prices because people just see how good the food is they're growing. And so to answer your question, I don't focus on nutrition as a goal. It's more of a really nice outcome that you get when you switch your practices to more regenerative ones. So in that case, yes, I focus on it, but it's not the goal that I'm striving for. It's just a really perfect benefit that comes on top.
Yeah, awesome. Like a bit of a byproduct. Do X and you'll get Y as default. And I really want to highlight what you made a point there, because I think sometimes this is what happens, is it becomes you against me. And I see this in a lot of the regenerative Facebook groups and so forth, where it becomes a little bit toxic. And I want to acknowledge, farmers want to grow good food. It's just unfortunate that sometimes they've gotten advice from the wrong people, or they've gotten what they think is the best advice from experts who are driven by a motivated money, a different system, And so it's not about blaming, conventional, regenerative, holistic, non-holistic. Everyone wants to grow great food. And most people got onto farming because they wanted to, live the life of their dream and have their dream farm and grow produce and bring people together. But the system has let everyone down, not just the farmers, but even us as consumers and buyers and eaters of the produce. It's let everyone down, and there's no name blaming. And I think working together and bridging that gap is absolutely what is needed, because there are so many farmers that we meet that say, look, I want to do something, but I've got the bank knocking on my door. If I don't make X amount of dollars, I have to do this because it's a proven system. And they kind of got their back in a corner. And we do need to create some kind of relief for people like that and get people working together and integrating these new worlds of thinking. So I really admire the fact that you've set up the business and focusing on bridging that gap. And so that was climatefarmers.org, and the links will be around the show notes and this video if you're watching on the Soil Learning Center. I want to ask you about your social media presence, because you also have an account called PermaNick, and I love following it, and that's how we've connected. And you create some really cool, fun content. Are you doing all this yourself, or do you have a team, or where do you get your ideas and inspiration from? Some of it's kind of fun and cheeky, and some of it's kind of impactful. Who's the mastermind?
No, that's just me in my free time. So it's basically, I have these two kind of roles. So the stuff that I'm doing as PermaNick is kind of my little hobby side. So I'm working full-time now on Climate Farmers. We also now founded the Climate Farmers Academy as a nonprofit. And with the whole Climate Farmers thing, we have the goal of, we want to see in 5 years, 10% of land in Europe managed in a regenerative way. That's kind of our gigantic goal. At the moment, it's closer to like 0.1%, I think so. And there we're working with large farms that want to transition, even though we're not the biggest fans of the word transition anymore, because we think like, it's not like now you're shit and you need to get to something good, but it's more like, hey, apply a few more of these practices. It will be good for your soil and also for your bottom line. And so that's what I'm doing 60, 70 hours a week. That's full-time job, definitely, the whole educational aspect. So we just launched now our first pilot project with Richard Perkins. So that we're working together with Richard Perkins and 10 farms in Europe, trying to get more practices to them. We're talking to other educators. Your soil lovers probably know Darren Dorothy. So we're in talks with them to see if we can do something together. So that's okay. How can we have huge impact on farms, on a farm scale? But I'm also a big fan of individual level stuff. And so with my Permaculture account, it's more like inspiring people to see, on the one hand, that there is this thing called permaculture, that we can start things also on a smaller scale, in a garden, that we can do things also, when you're just getting into it. So with that account, my main goal is just to inspire people to start thinking about things that matter, to start doing also. So, like, hey, just get one flower pot, grow your first plant. It'll be so rewarding. In no time, you'll have 10 and then 100. And then, it goes from there. So I'm also really, I love focusing on practical things that you can easily implement. And my biggest passion is definitely water and water management, water harvesting. So I build all these crazy things involving roofs and rainwater pipes and all that, that I got into while I was living on Tenerife, because there we only had 10 days of rain every year. So we had to really capture every drop. And so that's kind of like in my free time, when I have some spare time, I do that account. And I don't know, somehow I realized the purely educational posts, I care about them, but that's about it. Like if it's just education, people are like, yeah, okay, cool. And I realized humor is just a really great tool to get important messages across. So now I try to make some, memes about permaculture, soil, and those kind of things. And it works. I think a lot of people kind of get into it because of that, because it's a non-threatening, like, hey, you don't have to go to do a permaculture course, but you're on your phone anyways. And then it's like, this permanent guy again with this crazy stuff. Maybe I should start growing something. Maybe I should start covering my soil. So it's it's the two worlds. One is serving more on the smaller scale, where I also do consulting work and a bit of design work, but more for smaller farms that are just starting out. And then in the other role with climate farmers, we're really focusing on how can we transition the agricultural scene in Europe as a whole. So it's nice to sit in both seats.
Absolutely. It reminds me of that little kind of saying of like, think globally, but act locally. It's giving energy to the individual and to the corporate, to the one, to the many, that is very, very special to think about, actually. And I've really enjoyed the content that you've created and makes me laugh. And I share some of it because it I relate to it and it's quite fun. And I like that. And being a marketer and a tech guy, I like using different platforms to get a message across, because people, like you said before, we all learn different. Some people like to listen, some people like to watch. I definitely get addicted to what I call the endless loop of videos that go from one to the other, and 4 hours have passed and I'm like, God, so much stuff to do, so kudos to you for having so much time and working full time in Climate Farmers, and then also entertaining us on social media, planting those little seeds. And really important, that one little thing, growing one plant and doing one small action. There's 7.8 billion people on the planet. If every single one person did one small thing every day, that compounds and it's hugely impactful. And it is definitely a testament to the power of the people. So we tend to sit here and wait for legislation to catch up or rules to be created or frameworks to be worked out. It's like, don't worry about that. Just do something positive today and you'll be rewarded tomorrow, if not sometimes straight away.
Yeah, I think just to quickly jump into that, I think that's a really important message also for all listeners, because there's so much stuff going on in the world that is really, really bad. And if we wake up in the morning just listening to the news and thinking like, okay, we need to solve all of this at once, we'll be paralyzed and we'll never do anything. So what I would really recommend to all the listeners, but also everyone out there, choose one thing and do everything you can to solve that. So for me, that little niche, now it kind of became permaculture. Now I'm going more and more into hydrology, so into the water side. And I'm like, hey, I want to have a proper impact there. And if everyone on the planet just chose, like, these are already big topics, but there are enough problems out there. And if everyone just chooses one of them and really says, like, okay, the rest I can't really have an impact on, but that one I'm going all in. Imagine what would be possible. But we're all sitting there like, oh no, so much stuff is going on. Well, I can't have an impact anywhere. I'll just sit on the couch and watch Netflix, which is fine. I don't want to preach that everyone needs to do something. But just from the how rewarding it feels, I can highly recommend to choose one thing you're really passionate about, get into it, and you'll realize there's so many more people already working on it. You can get together and then actually have a big impact. So it's a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the Netflix thing, I think, watch Netflix, but watch a documentary, watch Kiss the Crown, watch, something that's going to inspire you. I definitely believe that, we, coming from the tech world, it's like hustle, faster, bigger. And that's doesn't work for me for anything really. No system is sustainable like that. But I agree. Like, especially now having these conversations with all people across the world, I'm just like, wow, everyone's thinking so big. And, I love your hydration focus as well. And I'm curious to know, like, what's your most craziest water hack technique that you can remember of diverting water, because that's something that people can do in their own backyard.
Wow, the craziest thing. We've built a lot of crazy stuff. But maybe one, I just built it recently here in the garden. Actually, I haven't shared it on Instagram yet. I still have all the content. I still need to put it into reels and stuff. But basically how it works is we had a carport where we just stored some stuff, and there the drain was broken because it was built in a let's save some money way, which was not a smart idea by the previous owners. So I rebuilt that now into a system where I'm working with rain pipes that go down below the carport. Then they go through our soil, through the garden in a patch, and then the pipe goes up again. And since these pipes are connected like a U shape, the water in them stays always the same. So basically the water level is just below the roof of the carport. And then the water goes down under the soil. So you can walk over it, you can drive over it, it's not in the way, but then it goes up. So that means I have water pressure now at a height of like, 1.50 meters, a bit more. And from there, I connected different kind of rain pipes with movable elbows. And those are actually filling up because we have raised beds, like fully raised beds that are around 1 meter high. So there I'm at 1.50 meters, and from there I'm diverting through different kind of tees and elbows into these 1 meter high raised beds that normally you always had to water by hand. And I've built these raised beds as wicking beds, so they have their own water reservoir at the bottom. And then from there, I'm also diverting. Once those are full, it automatically flows into our veggie garden, which is really nice because I like passive systems. Now all our raised beds, if it rains, I don't know, every few weeks, once a month, totally enough. Our raised beds get filled up. They have enough water. The veggie garden gets water that it normally wouldn't get. And also in our veggie garden, all the walkways are mulch, like wood mulch. And I dug them 0.5 meter deep throughout the whole thing. So we can store a lot of cubic meters of water also just in there, in our pathways. We never have muddy beds. The water is just stored in the pathways. It flows into that from the roof. And I built another system I was allowed to use the neighbor's roof. So from there, I'm diverting water into a little swale system that goes into our food forest. So yeah, I'm just trying to use every drop and bring it to places where I need it.
Love that. So innovative and, maybe a little bit more complicated in the mechanics of it, but even just, simple swales, redirecting water, getting it where you need it to be. That is very interesting as well, because so many people's backyards will probably, if people stop and watch the water and see where it flows, sometimes it doesn't take a lot of effort just to redirect it down into a garden bed or something like that. You don't have to get earth moving machinery in to redirect water sometimes. And I love the fact that you've got like a pipe tank system that doesn't even interfere with you walking or space. And the earth probably keeps it cool too, so it's a win-win-win. I want to ask our signature question, which is, if you were the voice of our soils, what would you tell us on Earth?
I would definitely tell everyone on Earth to please keep me covered and undisturbed. I'm very sensitive as a soil, and if I'm not covered, the sun is really hot, it burns me. It can get really cold. When it rains, a lot of my nutrition washes away. And yeah, please just keep me covered. And then also when it, keep roots inside of me. That would be really nice. Because when it rains, I can get hard when I'm not covered. It's a hard surface on top. It's like concrete. And then when it rains, it all just washes off and causes floods further down, which we just had the past days in Germany. We had catastrophic floods like never before. And if more people would cover me and ideally keep living plants inside of me, that would be perfect. I'd be really grateful for that.
Awesome. It makes me feel warm and cozy. I was just picturing, the same as we tuck ourselves into bed with a blanket and keep ourselves covered. We know we need to nurture our soils with the same attention and care, and putting plant life and green leaves and all that on top has so many benefits, from keeping it cool, keeping it warm, erosion, hydration, and life, and deep roots, and all the magical stuff that hopefully our soil listeners are starting to learn as they dig deeper into their soils through the podcast and the other information that everyone's been sharing. Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you and chatting all things soil. And we got a guest appearance from your cat, which I'm always open to, having guest appearances on our podcast. So thank you very much for coming along. Is there a final thought that you want our soil lovers to think about on their day today? Yeah,
maybe what I kind of touched upon earlier is really just get going with something. There's always a reason to not do it because it's not good enough, not big enough, not whatever enough. But just do a tiny thing. Plant one seed, do one thing, capture one drop of rainwater, get active in your community. Just go to one meeting. That's what I would really recommend. Like, don't try to start too big and too perfect, but just get out there and start doing.
Love that. Something little is better than nothing. So you heard it first, soil lovers, get on out there, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into your soils. Nick, thank you so much for coming along and sharing all your wisdom and knowledge and tips and tricks. How can people hang out with you? What's a site or a link that people can go to?
I think the easiest and where I'm most active is Instagram. So that's Permaculture. That should be easy to find. Also, now I'm slowly growing my presence on TikTok because the video format is just really hilarious. I think those two places are the best. Otherwise, at permanic.com. But it's more of a website, so it just has some info. But all the fun is happening on Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely feel in that as well. I am starting to do a little bit more in TikTok, and it's such a weird platform to get my head around. I feel old sometimes, which I am probably getting older, but I just feel like, what the hell is going on? But it's lots of fun, and I do think there's some really fun stuff that we can do as soil lovers on TikTok and be a bit cheeky as well. All right, Nick, I'll let you get on with your morning. Thank you very much for getting up early to join us today. We'll keep the conversation going offline. All those links that Nick mentioned will be around the video in the show notes.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. Well, soil lovers, there you have it. Get on outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into your soils. I'll keep drumming that into you. And remember, if you want to watch the video version of this, head on over to soillearningcenter.com. Well, soil lovers, that's enough secrets for one episode. I really hope that you enjoyed all the secrets shared during this conversation. But hey, let's not keep it a secret. Please share this podcast around and make sure that you like it and leave us a review, because that really helps spread the secrets of the soil. Until next time, remember, get outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into your soils.